Over 8 consecutive nights in January of 1977, the ABC television network broadcast Roots, a miniseries dramatizing the experiences of 4 generations of African Americans, beginning with the story of a Mandinka teenager kidnapped by slave traders in 1765 and proceeding through the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, and Reconstruction. 40 years later, the story of Roots continues to serve as a cultural touchstone, a landmark event in television history, and an enduring, if controversial, parable about the nature of American, and particularly African American, identity. The story of Roots begins on this spacious porch in Henning, Tennessee. On this porch in 1921, Simon and Bertha Haley surprised Bertha's parents with a bundle of joy, a 6-week-old baby who would grow up to become the writer Alex Haley. Simon's career as a professor kept him moving around from one teaching post to another, and the couple decided to leave the baby with his doting grandparents, Will and Cynthia Palmer. The young boy would go on to spend countless hours on that porch, listening to his grandmother and great-aunts tell their old folks' stories, and particularly the one about the African, Kunta Kinte, who called a guitar a ko and a river Kambi Balonga. Years of listening to his grandmother's stories nurtured in Haley an adeptness at listening to people, imagining their points of view, and appreciating the value of storytelling itself as a crucial form of knowledge. These qualities served him remarkably well in his days in the Coast Guard where, as Haley has frequently explained, he earned a reputation for writing letters on behalf of his fellow shipmates, trying to make up or break up with girlfriends back home. Haley was able to inhabit the perspectives of other crew members more convincingly and to more persuasive effect than these men could ever have done themselves. Haley drew on the same fine-tuned instincts for empathetic intuition in his early writing career, particularly in his interviews with controversial figures such as Miles Davis, Martin Luther King Jr., Muhammad Ali, and of course, Malcolm X. Haley himself appreciated the extent to which he had been shaped by those hours on his grandmother's porch, and as early as 1964 he landed a publishing deal with Doubleday for a novel based on his hometown, the project which would, over the next 12 years, develop into the mass media phenomenon Roots. Since then, Roots itself has become a story that one generation hands down to another, the epic saga of a television show that broke the Nielsen ratings and that, according to some accounts, changed the way we think and talk about race, and particularly about slavery, in this country. It is certainly remarkable in our contemporary balkanized media environment to imagine that there was a time when almost half the American population all watched the same television show, and it is even more remarkable that the show that they were all watching was one that critiqued the past of American racism so directly. Roots' success was an enormous surprise, even to the ABC studio executives, who scheduled it to run on 8 consecutive nights to hedge their losses in case the miniseries turned out to be a flop, and it is impossible to blame the executives for their skepticism. To this day, it is still surprising to see, in the list of highest-rated shows of all time, the final episode of Roots, now knocked down to number 3, sandwiched between a 1980 episode of Dallas and the 1982 Super Bowl. Roots is hardly standard televisual fare, particularly for its period. The talented television writers involved in the production gamely spruce up Haley's narrative with soap operatic twists and cliffhangers, but these aspects of the show are window dressing, the details most likely to be forgotten by someone who watched the show years or decades ago. The most memorable and most signature scenes in the miniseries are its depictions of degradation, brutality, sexual violence, and human cruelty that are difficult to watch, even by modern standards. The fact that these scenes of horror are presented as historical fact, and that these scenes deal so starkly with the uber-sensitive topic of black-white race relations, makes the widespread popularity of Roots even more remarkable. Roots is a sprawling narrative, a doorstop of a book, and, as televised in 1977, a historical melodrama of epic proportions. Like all great stories, however, it has a basic kernel that you can hold in the palm of your hand, a basic element that animates all of the parts. In the case of Roots, that element is the importance of storytelling itself. The one ray of hope that Roots confers to disperse the darkness of historical, racialized violence is the bond of continuity and epistemic integration that characterizes the art of narrative. Roots' most hopeful moments are those occasions when characters repeat the story of Kunta Kinte, the Ko, and the Kambi Balonga. Through the very act of preserving and retelling these stories, they stage a resistance to forces of dehumanization and deracination. Haley's writing project is itself his own 20th century version of this retelling, one capable of turning the entire world into a porch in rural Tennessee. The mass audiences who tuned into Roots, likewise, found their own postmodern ways to participate in this telling and retelling, and in letters to the author, op-ed essays, workplace conversations, genealogical research, and other forms of expression, they wove themselves into the story as well. Roots was followed by a sequel, Roots: The Next Generations, which traced the family lineage right up to Haley himself and culminates in his writing of Roots. Since then, however, history has written a new chapter in this multi-generational saga. Haley's mega-celebrity following the publication and broadcast of Roots plunged him into a vortex of hype and controversy that provides as much of a window into the economic and cultural realities of the late 20th century as Kunta Kinte's story reveals about those of the 18th. Hailed as a visionary, but also attacked as a fraud, a plagiarist, and a bourgeois reactionary, Haley's life after 1977 evinces elements of racial animus and stigmatization that are vividly depicted throughout his historical novel. Haley's literary success story provides the happy ending, however deferred, for Kunta Kinte and his progeny, but his story also suggests the manner in which racialized vitriol continues to haunt the American dream, even for the most successful African Americans. Beyond the controversy, however, the notoriety of Roots as a culturally significant multi-platform media event speaks for itself. Although Henry Louis Gates, Jr., chief editor of the canon-establishing Norton Anthology of African American Literature, excluded Roots from that publication, Dr. Gates also affirmed the significance of Haley's novel in what may be an even more meaningful way by using it as the inspiration for his long-running PBS series, Finding Your Roots, in which he uses DNA analysis to trace celebrities' familial ancestries. A recent surge in scholarship and cultural interest has grown up around Roots during this 40th anniversary period. Last year, the History Channel aired a remake of Roots that was widely watched and well received. The first book-length biography of Alex Haley by Robert Norell and the first scholarly book about Roots itself, Making Roots by Matthew Delmont, were both published last year. An edited collection of scholarly essays about Roots, edited by Erica Ball and Kelly Carter Jackson, was published this year following a special Roots-themed issue of the journal Transition, guest-edited by the same pair of scholars. The work of these historians and media critics participates in the cultural endeavor of reassessing the meaning of Roots and helps to bring the themes that Haley wrote about into dialogue with the racial climate of our own moment, when recent events in Ferguson, Charlottesville, and the nation's NFL stadiums confront us with the awareness that these themes are just as relevant today as they were 40 years ago. By telling and retelling Kunta Kinte's story, we advance a centuries-long project of reconciliation, understanding, and community making.